What's going on, everybody? Handal Kim here, and today we're going to go through how to run the numbers on a rental property. So let's get it popping. There are 4 things that you really got to pay attention to in running the numbers for rental properties, and that is income, expenses, cash flow, and return on investment. And I'm going to put them on the board, and it's going to go like this. Boom! So with these 4 exciting headings on the board, we're going to be looking at a particular property which we're going to purchase right now for $200,000. Okay, it can be a commercial property, it could be a residential property, whatever you buy that generates income, this is what it's going to be, but it has to be a property, of course. So let's say on this particular property, we're going to generate a monthly income of $2,000. Now, this income right here is obviously the rental income. The traditional rent is what we're considering for the sake of this exercise today, but there are more creative and interesting ways to actually collect higher and better rentals, depending on the type of property that you own. If it's residential, you could do shorter term rentals as well. If you have commercial, you can do shorter term rentals too, depending on the type of space that you have. It could be that you have extra storage space that you could rent out as well. So be creative when it comes to collecting rent. You want to collect as much rent as possible, but hey, those are some extra tips there which you can find out more about on my channel. So make sure you like, share, and subscribe. But for the sake of today's exercise, this is the money that you're going to receive on your rental property. So $2,000 a month is what you're collecting. And let's say there was no other income on top of that. Now let's move on to expenses. Now there are many expense items when it comes to owning a rental properties. I'm going to jot down some of them, right? You're going to have taxes, right? Which sometimes can be included within your loan repayments, depending on the part of the world you live in, right? In the United States, they do a lot more of this structuring, but in Australia, maybe you have to separately calculate that as well. See how your jurisdiction works and make sure that you consider any kind of tax implications of owning a property as well. So in this situation, we're gonna allocate about $150 for your taxes. Now, another big item for rental property, you're gonna have insurance. Right, and obviously for property to property, you're going to have a different level of insurance and a different level of premium that you'll need to pay. And a good rule of thumb to use for a property of this nature, I would allocate about $100 per month in insurance premiums. Now there are other expense items such as electricity, sewage, water, and all those things. But for the sake of this exercise, we're not going to be allocating any cost elements for those, because in many jurisdictions, those utilities, those metered connections are going to be on charge to your tenants, who will use varying amounts of these utilities based on their occupancy and their use of the property. So some of these things include electricity, water, sewer, garbage, gas, phone, or any other utilities that you might think of. Another really important item to consider is strata fees. In the United States, they call it homeowners association fees. So that means if your property belongs in a strata or in an association, you have to pay annual or monthly fees to actually pay for the cost of the management of the group of property that you belong to. In this situation, the property that we're looking at does not belong in an association. It does not belong in a strata or a community. So we're going to allocate no expense for this particular item. So you now have just learned that buying a property that is not part of a strata, community, or an association will be better in that they do not become liable, in that you do not have to pay any association or community fees. So make sure you go for those freehold opportunities. If you see them, they are a better alternative to association properties. Now, in some properties, you might actually have to do the gardening. I, for example, live in a property where I rent, more on that a bit later, but the gardening at this home that I live in is included with the rent. But we're also going to allocate 0 amount for that for the sake of this exercise. But we do have to consider vacancy cost. I'd allocate another $100 a month for that one. That's around about 5% of the rent that you're collecting on a monthly basis. Running a bit out of space here, but I'm going to allocate repairs at around about $100 per month. And we're also going to allocate capex, so any kind of capital expenditure such as doing of the kitchen or anything like that that happens once every, I don't know, 5 or 6 years, that you might have to replenish some of the more structural elements of the property, like your bathrooms and things like that, or anything to do with commercial properties. I'm going to allocate another $100 a month for that one, as they will accumulate over the years, and that will budget you the amount of money that you can put into the capital expenditure of a particular property. Another really important expense is going to be property management. which is going to be around about $200 a month, clocking in at around about 10% of the rent that you collect. Now, in terms of mortgage repayments, yes, I'm going to include a pretty large figure on this particular number. With mortgage, I'm going to allocate around about $800 a month. Now, that's quite a fair bit because we did say we're going to buy this property at $200,000. And if we, let's say, put down 20% onto the actual purchase price, we're going to borrow about $160,000 worth of money, and that clocks in quite high, but we're just going to use this number for the sake of this calculation. So after all of this, we can see that the expenses of this particular property sits in around about 150, 250, 350, 450, 550, 750. So that's $1,550 that we're going to be allocating as expenses. Okay, then what is our cash flow? Cash flow is pretty simple. It's basically your income minus the expenses. So that's your $2,000 minus $1,550, which works out to be $450 a month that is kind of come into your pockets. In this situation, obviously your expenses are less than the income that you generate. We call this a positively geared property, and yes, by owning this property, you will be making that much money. Okay, now, what is the return on investment for this particular income? This is the amount of money that's actually going to go into owning your property. Let's say at the beginning you put $40,000 as a down payment, right? So I'll go down payment. And then you're going to pay another 5% of this as your closing costs. So let's say that's about $10,000. So closing costs is $10,000. And then let's say you're going to spend another $5,000 in actually touching up the property so that it becomes a lot more leasable. So renovation for reno. All right, so the cost of actually buying this property in the first place is $55,000. So that's the actual money that's going to come out of your pocket to actually own this particular property. Okay, so we're going to actually calculate the return on investment on the actual money that leaves your pocket to actually own this property around the income that you generate, which is $450 a month. So we're going to multiply 12 times by 450, which works out to be, hey Siri, what's 450 times by 12?
Okay, I found this on the web.
That was
450 times by 12.
That wasn't helpful. 450 times by 12 is $5,400, right? I totally used my head to calculate that. Now, based on that income, that's your annual income. So that's basically going to be your annual income because there are 12 months in a year. So that's $5,400 over $55,000, which then works out to be some percentage. I'm going to have to ask Siri again, but it's probably not going to answer me. And that works out to be about 9.8% in return on investment. And we call this cash on cash, because this is the cash that you have to put down, is the money that is leaving, and this is the cash income that actually comes in through your cash flow. Okay, now the big question is this number here good or not? Now the best way to identify whether that figure is good or not is for you to go and start doing some research. Go to your property listing website that is within your jurisdiction, basically within your city that you live in. Just go and search for some properties, see how much they're selling for, see how much properties like that with the same number of beds, the same type of finish is leasing out for within the market as well. So go and research those figures and run the mathematics behind it. So after doing a few of this research, you'll be able to understand what numbers are good and what numbers are bad. Now, you might say, Hunger, I don't know how much things are going to cost in there. Well, you know what? I've talked about roughly how much things are going to cost. If you actually play these numbers, right, as a proportion of the property size and as in the purchase price that you're purchasing it at, well then those are some of the things that you can consider. Numbers like strata fees or homeowners association fees, and maybe your tax and things like that, you can ask that from the agent that you're buying from. So you can send them a quick email saying, hey, what are your outgoings on the property? And they'll be able to share with you these fees as well, which then you will obviously consider into the actual purchase price as well. Any other costs, you can ask the professionals that actually deal with in this area to actually identify those costs. Some of the more enigmatic costs can be your repairs, maintenance, and capex, and also any renovations that you might need to do at the beginning. But within this kind of budget that you're going to buy, sort of under $500,000 or maybe up to $1 million, sort of budgeting between about that $10,000 to about $40,000 in terms of capex, depending on the deal size that you're doing, will be a good place to start for you to run some numbers and to identify whether your investment is going to be worth it or not. So this is basically how you run your numbers. I have an Excel spreadsheet for this, which will be available in the description below. So make sure you download it and run the numbers using that, and hopefully that'll be a great way for you to run some proper mathematics before you get started. Sometimes people look at this income and the price and you go, wow, that's fantastic. That works out to be $24,000 a year, and that's $200,000 you're gonna make. That's more than 10% you're gonna generate. Wow, that's fantastic. But you really have to consider all the costs. That way you're running a proper business as a landlord and as a property owner and a portfolio developer in real estate. So thank you so much for tuning in today. If you have any questions, please leave them below. Please like, subscribe, and make sure you ring that bell so you can see every content that I generate. Thank you so much for joining us today, and I will see you next time.